I'm Phil the Grill Johnson, Championship Pitmaster. Master your summer barbecue with my favorite tips. I think ribs are the best thing for a summer barbecue. You know why? Because they're just something that you can pick up and eat with your fingers. You know, being out in the backyard with family and friends, you know, grabbing that rib or that chicken or, you know, it's all finger foods, you know, and that's what you want. When I'm at the store looking for my rib options, you know, there's a couple of things that I'm looking for. You know, you have different types of ribs. You have a spare rib, you have a baby back, you have a St. Louis rib, and then you also have rib tips. What I like to do is I like to get the spare rib. The reason why I like to get the spare rib is because you get 2 for 1. You actually have the rib tips attached to the St. Louis. You have your center cut ribs here. I try to look for straight bones on the back. Very little fat, but you do want to have some kind of marbling. It's going to add flavor and it's also going to melt down in your cook as well. What I'm going to do here first is I'm going to find the gnarly pieces of the spare rib and cut that off. You're going to want to find a straight line right above the longest bone on your rack and just go straight down with your knife. I like to use a nice sharp butcher knife that will go through because you're gonna hit some cartilage. It's not just an easy cut. So what I did here is I made 2 different cuts. This is your St. Louis cut for spare ribs, and then this is your rib tip. The rib tip is also called the brisket rib bone. The brisket rib bone is the same thing you might get at certain restaurants, and you just got those like little bites of rib tips, and that's also a great thing to cook for a barbecue as an appetizer if you want to. I personally like to take the membrane off the back of my spare rib. It allows the seasoning that you apply to penetrate into that meat. And it also gives a nice tender bite at the end of your cook. The easiest way I find to remove the membrane is to take the back of a spoon and find a bone right underneath the membrane. You could start your pull. Then what I'll do is I'll get my fingers in there and start pulling it through. And then you just want to work it to where you can get a nice grip on it and then just pull it all the way back. So what I'll do is I'll grab a back of a paper towel because it's kind of slippery. Once I got my finger all the way across, I'll work up to the front of that membrane and then I'll hold it with the paper towel and then just rip it all the way through the back. You have a big, thick brisket bone right here on the back of the rib tip. What you want to do is remove that. Just try to get, again, a nice sharp knife and just follow that brisket bone down. I'm going to trim up some of the fat on the back of this rib tip, and this is just gnarly fat pieces and deposits that won't render down in the cooking. What I like to do when I'm cooking ribs, I like to use a rub with a low salt content. So now I can really put the spices on and make sure I can get a great bark on anything that I cook. What I like to do before I apply my seasoning is use a little bit of olive oil. That's going to help the seasoning adhere to the meat. When I apply my rub, I go heavy. By applying this rub heavy, it's going to help the ribs marinate and get that flavor soaked into the meat. That's what bark is. It's the seasoning that crusted over the meat while you're smoking it. So now that the seasoning is heavily applied, we're going to let it sit for 10-15 minutes. We want the meat to sweat. We want the rub to really sit in and penetrate into that meat. And then we'll flip it and apply the other side. 15 minutes went by and look at the rub. Look how it really sweated into those ribs. So what we're gonna do is flip and do the other side. Wait for 15 minutes and let this rub start penetrating into the meat. Now we're ready to go get that fire built in that smoker. I prefer to smoke my rib. I like to see that nice smoke ring around my rib. You can also grill them. It will be different. It won't taste the same, but I prefer to smoke my ribs. I have 2 different smokers out here. I have a bullet water smoker where the flame will hit the top pan of water and keep everything moist. I also have a barrel. This is set up to do a hot and fast smoking. So we're gonna do it 2 ways. We're gonna do it with a rib rack on the water smoker, and we're gonna hang some ribs on the barrel drum here. The smoker is actually intended for you to do a slow cook. By doing a slow cook, you are actually taking the meat and cooking at about 250 to 275 on a slow cook. If you're planning a barbecue and you have your meats, you really want to get out there an hour before you cook to get your smokers ready, get them up to temp. I like to use charcoal with a little bit of wood in it. This actually has a little bit of cherry. You could add to the cherry wood to help enhance it, such as hickory. Hickory is more of a stronger wood that will give more of that smoky flavor. But you don't want to overpower with something like hickory or oak or mesquite, because those things are very pungent woods and they will give you a lot of smoky flavor, and that is all you'll be tasting when you finish your cook. You know, you want to have the opportunity to spray your meats once they start looking dry. You want to keep that moisture applied to the meat, but make sure the bark is set and the seasoning won't run off on you. I call it the scratch test. If you're able to put your finger on the meat and scratch it off, it is not ready to be spritzed yet. You want to let that seasoning really sit and crust over before you start spraying, otherwise you're going to lose all your flavor. You could spritz with anything. You could use some beer, you could use apple juice is one of the fan favorites. You could actually use some white grape juice. You can actually over smoke things, you know? So I feel like this has plenty of color, especially the ones I was hanging over the hot flame. So to stop getting smoke, you wanna just wrap it. I got a little bit of butter, got a little bit of brown sugar I add. I'll put a little bit of honey. Put meat side down, bone side up on my ribs. I got a little bit of pineapple juice. I'll just pour like about 2 tablespoons on the back of the ribs. Wrap it up nice and tight. Flatten that out, fold it, flatten it out, fold it. Now I got a nice rib pack. I got the butter, I got that honey, got that brown sugar right at the meat part of that rib. It's going to cook down, render down as it cooks, and it's just going to give more flavor and a little bit of sweetness to that rib. So we got smokiness, we got some savoriness. Now we just added some sweetness to this rib, and it's going to be delicious at the end. I'm going to leave those on for about 30 to 45 minutes and then bring it through its final phase. My last step to this barbecue cookout is adding the sauce to the proteins. So what I like to do the last 10 minutes before anybody comes, add a little sauce, brush it in, and put it back on the smoker at a low temperature just to set the sauce. A trick I use when I'm cutting my ribs and about to serve, I like to do bone side up so I can see exactly where to place my knife. Guaranteed you're gonna hit a bone and not have the great cuts that you will if you have the bone side facing it. You know, my favorite part of the summer barbecue is just seeing people's faces light up as they bite into your dish and everybody enjoying yourself. You know, happy people, happy faces is just a great time. And you know, that's what I like to see in this world.